She laughed at you not with cruelty, but with confidence, like a cat stretching before a mirror, unaware of the predator watching. You stood still, too polite to blink, too noble to interrupt, too moral to speak the words already burning behind your teeth. But you saw it, didn't you? That flicker of calculation behind her gaze. The way her silence didn't surrender, it selected. Not because she was cruel, but because she was ancient. She smelled the weakness in your hesitation. She tested your restraint, not out of love, but curiosity, and you failed her, not by hurting her, but by sparing her. You held open the door, but never locked it behind her. You offered kindness when the script demanded a verdict. You negotiated where you should have vanished. You apologized before the knife even touched the skin. And now, she smiles at someone else, someone colder, crueler, quieter, not because he is better, but because he understood the ritual. If this whisper already lives inside your spine, let it move, like the video. Leave your mark in the comments. Subscribe, and watch in silence as the game turns to you. She only submits when she senses you could dethrone her, not when you worship her. She walks into the room as if the crown was already welded to her skull, not a queen by right, but by the absence of resistance. You, like all the others, bowed before the ritual even began. Your eyes softened, your voice lowered, your gestures bled courtesy. And in that moment, she didn't see a man. She saw a servant or worse, a subject without a sword. You mistook charm for power. She mistook you for furniture. You think women seek love, but she's watching for something else, the one man whose silence could rival her mirror, whose gaze doesn't bend when hers turns wild, whose presence rearranges the atmosphere without a single plea for approval. The rest, the ones who offer flowers, words, or tenderness too early, she discards them like letters from a kingdom she never feared. She doesn't want to be worshipped. She wants to be threatened not with violence, but with irrelevance. And you failed because you believed you could earn her loyalty by kneeling. But loyalty never flows upward, not in the palace of her body, not in the theater of her mind. The more you obey, the less she dreams of your hands. She tests, always, a word that sounds like defiance, a delay in her response, a subtle contradiction in her story, and you explain yourself. You reassure her, you clarify, you overcompensate, you protect the image of being the good one, but she was never asking for safety. She was asking, can you strike back? Will you take the throne if I abandon it for one moment? Because here's the truth you've never admitted: the feminine does not want to rule. Not really. She only claims the throne when none dare challenge her. And when every man kneels, she is cursed to command, not because she is powerful, but because she is alone in a castle of cowards. So she builds her walls higher, her voice sharpens, her touch disappears, and you tell yourself she's cold, or broken, or unready. But it was your obedience that emptied her. She once looked at you with curiosity, wondering if you might be different. If perhaps your silence meant danger, your calm meant dominance, your restraint meant planning, but you used your voice to comfort. You offered your heart like a lamb. She smelled your mercy, and she turned away. Submission is not asked for, it's extracted, not with cruelty, but with certainty, not by raising your voice, but by lowering your tolerance. She watches the way you handle disrespect, not hers, but the world's. She watches how you navigate confrontation, how you look at other women, how you walk away from pettiness. She's watching for signs of rule, not of her, but of yourself. Because only a man who governs his own chaos can make her kneel, not from fear, but from awe, and awe is rare. She will not give it to a man who flinches when tested. She will not give it to a man who apologizes for his standards. She will not give it to the man who says, "I understand," every time she lashes out in confusion. That man is not feared. That man is not remembered. And yet, you kept showing up with softness, thinking it would melt her, thinking kindness would break her guard. But she didn't want her guard broken. She wanted it met, matched, cracked open by something colder than her, stronger than her, quieter than her chaos. Not a scream, a silence that unnerves, a stillness that cannot be moved. A gaze that reads through the veil and says, "I see your performance, and I am not impressed." This is the moment she feels herself, not when you praise her beauty, but when you do not flinch at her mask. Not when you offer unconditional love, but when your presence makes her question her own tactics. When her favorite manipulations bounce off you like dull arrows against armor. And still you gave. You gave time. You gave affection. You gave explanation. Every gift she never asked for, stacked like pillows on a throne she never desired. And one day, she left. Quietly. Without warning, she told her friends, he was perfect, just not for me. But what she meant was, he never made me feel unsafe enough to let go. Because letting go is what she craves. To drop the sword, to fall into a current stronger than her will. To feel overpowered not by brute force, but by the absence of need. That is submission. That is the hidden hunger behind her strongest performances. To be ruled not with dominance, but with consequence. But you feared consequence. You feared losing her. You feared saying no. You feared the look on her face if you contradicted her. So you smiled, and she vanished. There was a moment you remember it when her voice trembled. Just once. When she looked at you as if she were testing the depth of your silence. She said something sharp, irrational. She pushed a boundary. You had the chance to look her in the eye and let the silence hang, but you filled it. With laughter, with validation, with an offering, and something in her died. Because women don't lose interest randomly. They drift when the structure beneath them shows cracks. When the container collapses. When the king refuses his throne and sits at her feet. She wanted to feel owned, not in body, in gravity. She wanted to know that if she fell apart, you would not. That if she burned down the room with emotion, you would remain a cold ember in the center, unmoved, unafraid. That if she turned monstrous, you would not tame her, you would watch, and wait, and decide if she still deserved your presence. That's what makes her submit. The knowing that your love is not guaranteed, that your loyalty is not unconditional, that your gaze is not a compliment, but a verdict, and your touch a reward, not a routine. But now, you scroll through her photos. The smile she used to fake for you now rests on another man's shoulder. A man who says less than you. A man who cares less than you. A man who doesn't offer, only takes. And you whisper to yourself, why him? But deep down, you already know. Because you once stood before the empty throne behind her eyes, and instead of claiming it, you bowed. She provokes not to hurt, but to feel the edge of your control, the one thing she cannot mimic. There was a night you remember not because of what she said, but how she said it. The pause after her words, the deliberate edge in her voice, the way her eyes flickered, not with emotion, but with strategy. She knew exactly where your pride lived, and she pierced it softly, almost playfully, like a child pressing her fingertip into a bruise to see what happens. She wanted the reaction, not because she hated you, but because she needed to see what you do with the blade. Whether you draw it or bleed, you mistook her provocation as insult, but it was an invitation, a sacred rite masked in modern contempt. Her test wasn't for cruelty, it was for containment. She doesn't want to lead, She wants to be held, not physically, but psychically wrapped in the tension of a man who could end her illusions, and yet chooses not to. And that choice only matters if he could. But you flinched. You over-explained. You softened the edges of your anger like a man ashamed of fire. And in that moment, she knew she could say anything. And you'd make excuses for her. You'd protect her from herself. And that's when the game ended. Because now she's holding both roles, queen and judge. There's no resistance left. No edge to sharpen her performance. You offered her peace, and she found it boring. Because feminine chaos does not crave calm. It craves containment, not walls but direction, not worship but force. A force that doesn't flail, doesn't whine, doesn't prove. A force that waits, observes, corrects, and if needed, punishes. Not with loudness, but with absence. You never learn to punish, not because you're kind, but because you're afraid. Afraid she'll leave, afraid she'll cry, afraid she'll see you as controlling. So you let the blade rust. You let your boundaries dissolve. And she, once trembling at the tension between your patience and your power, now scrolls through your messages like a priest reading confessions he no longer believes. Her worst fear is not being rejected. It's not being met. You didn't scare her. You didn't match her fire with frost. You didn't offer silence when she demanded chaos. You answered too quickly. You justified too easily. You apologized before guilt was even real. And so she kept escalating louder, colder, more erratic, hoping, praying that at some point you would finally snap. Not violently, just firmly, decisively. She wanted to hear the click of the lock, the shift in tone, the final line in the sand. But you never drew it, and now you think she's toxic. That word so modern, so cowardly, is a disguise for your failure to rule. She wasn't toxic, she was ungoverned, she wasn't dramatic, she was desperate for a man who wouldn't bend. A man who could witness her storm without being soaked. A man who could say, stop, and mean it. She's not the first. Others before her tried too. One flirted with your friend in front of you, watching your face like a chessboard. One went silent for a week, expecting you to disappear. One cried in public, not for attention, but to see if your calm could hold the weight of her unraveling. And each time, you responded with softness. You wrote long messages. You reassured. You asked what you did wrong. But the truth is brutal. You didn't do anything wrong. You just failed to do the one thing that would have saved everything, say nothing. Let the blade hang in the air. Let her twist under the silence of a man who isn't threatened. A man who can walk away. Who will walk away. Not to manipulate, but because his dignity is not up for negotiation. That's the knife she wanted you to draw. It's not about being cruel. It's about being final. When she lies, you withdraw. When she tests, you judge. When she escalates, you don't match her chaos. You let it burn itself out while you remain cold. And that coldness, it terrifies her, not because it hurts, but because it proves you are real. You are not controlled by her emotion. You are not hostage to her affection. You are not swayed by the heat of her performance. She wanted that. She still wants it, even now. She posts the same story, a quote about strong women or learning to let go, but it's not for herself. It's bait. She wants a man to see through it, to not react, to not comment, to not chase, but to show up once with presence so sharp she forgets the lines she rehearsed. And you still think love is about sacrifice. That being good will earn her loyalty. But she doesn't want a martyr. She wants a monarch, someone who takes what he wants, gives what he chooses, and never explains himself to the court of emotion. That's why she stares at the man who says less than you, the one who lets her cry and doesn't flinch, the one who leaves when she crosses the line, the one who holds her gaze without blinking, She doesn't love him because he's kind. She loves him because he's true. And truth, to a woman testing the world for strength, is worth more than warmth. You are not meant to soothe her demons. You are meant to scare them, not with fear but with stillness, with refusal, with edge, with the knowing that if she plays too long, she'll lose you, not to another woman, but to yourself. Because the knife is not violence. It is the moment you say, "This ends here," and she believes you. She wanted that blade, not in her skin, but in your spine. But you kept folding. Every test she launched came back unanswered. Every challenge she posed returned with an apology. And now, the very chaos she once offered as a gift, you call a red flag. But it wasn't red, it was gold. It was the signal flare, the last invitation to draw your sword. Now she lies beside someone else, not speaking, not testing, not provoking, because she no longer has to. His edge is there, constant, silent, absolute. She rests, not because she's finally healed, but because she's finally met her match. And you still believe in being nice. The man who haunts her most is the one who never asked for her love, only left her with silence and consequence. He doesn't text her anymore. He doesn't watch her stories. He doesn't like her posts, doesn't comment on the new haircut, doesn't ask about her dog or the trip she planned without him. He vanished not in anger, not in pain, but in a quiet that hums through her bones like an unfinished song. He was not the loudest. He was not the kindest. He simply disappeared at the exact moment she thought he'd crawl. And now he lives in the corners of her mirror. She still argues with him in her head. At night, when the house is still and the makeup is off, she replays their last conversation, trying to find the part where she could have won. She analyzes the silence between his words, the look in his eyes right before he said nothing, because he said it all with that silence. He didn't beg, he didn't plead, he didn't stay, he just saw her and left. Not to punish, but to preserve. You see, women do not fear being abandoned. They fear being unworthy of pursuit. They fear indifference, disinterest. The cold, surgical cut of a man who sees the full shape of them, the beauty, the chaos, the tricks, and walks away anyway. Not because he's broken, but because he's complete. He never raised his voice, never slammed a door, never sent a final message at 3 a.m. He simply refused to play. And it's that refusal that makes him immortal. Because all the others, those who stayed, who pleaded, who forgave again and again, they dissolve into dust, forgotten kindnesses, faint echoes. Men who bled for her and now lie faceless in her memory. But not him. He said less. And somehow that said everything. His absence isn't an empty space, it's a mirror, and every man after him reflects what he refused to become. The one who texts too fast, the one who never leaves first, the one who explains, defends, apologizes, tries. She hates how easy it is to manipulate them. She hates how predictable they are, and yet she keeps trying just in case one of them holds the same spine, but they never do. They crumble under softness. They fold when tested. They need love like air, and air is boring. But him, he never needed her, and that's why she needed him. You think love is about effort, that showing up is the highest form of devotion, that persistence wears down resistance. But she never wanted to be worn down. She wanted to be broken open, not by cruelty, but by consequence. And he gave her that not through punishment, but by withholding himself, fully, cleanly, as if her absence meant freedom. And yet, he never rubbed it in. That's what kills her. The dignity, the silence, the refusal to explain himself like a defendant on trial for disappearing. He left the gavel on her table and vanished. And now, she tries herself every night, wondering what crime she committed. She tells her friends he was emotionally unavailable, that he had a wall, that he never opened up. But those are lies she tells to protect herself from the truth that he was too available to himself to kneel for her chaos. He didn't need to process his feelings. He had already decided. He knew what she was doing, the jealousy tests, the cold spells, the long replies, the "I'm not sure" comments laced with bait. And every time, he answered not with reaction but with distance. And that distance, it felt like falling into space. Not because he hated her, but because he was the first man to make her feel replaceable. That is the true terror. Not being hurt, but being dismissed. And not dramatically, but as an act of quiet sovereignty. The kind that says, I don't need to hurt you to leave you. And you wonder why she keeps going back to him in her head. Why his name still lingers when she touches someone else. Why she can't remember what your cologne smelled like, but she remembers the exact angle of his jaw when he turned away. It's because he was the first ghost that never begged for closure. Closure is a ritual for the weak, for the ones who need mutual understanding to justify departure. But he didn't need it, because he knew her understanding of why he left was irrelevant. Her tears would not earn his return. Her regret would not redeem her test. She gambled his dignity and lost. You want to be unforgettable, then disappear with your self-respect intact. You want her to ache for you, then make her question her power. You want to haunt her, then give her nothing to heal from, because healing requires wounds. And he never gave her that satisfaction. He didn't scream, he didn't accuse, he didn't reveal how deeply she cut. He just removed himself like a king reclaiming his throne from a court that no longer deserved it. And now she imagines him still calm, still composed, still unmoved, living a life she will never see. Not because he blocked her, but because he made watching him beneath her dignity. She'll never reach out, because she knows she lost something sacred, and there are no words for that kind of loss. So she dates softer men, kinder men, men who call her beautiful every morning, men who wait for her texts, men who give everything and ask for nothing. And still, she lies awake, wondering how a man could see everything she was and walk away. She doesn't miss his warmth, she misses the gravity. And you still think it's about being enough, that if you love hard enough, long enough, gently enough, she'll remember you. But memory doesn't cling to comfort, it clings to contrast, to the one man who stood in the storm and didn't flinch, the one who left not to prove anything, but because he had already won the only game that mattered, the one with himself. That's the man she fears meeting again, and the man she prays will return, but he never will. And that's why she'll never forget him. In a dream she doesn't share. He stands in the doorway, neither angry nor kind, just watching. She calls his name, but the silence answers first. A single candle flickers behind him, casting no shadow. The air is still. Her throat tightens. She steps forward. He vanishes, and the room, for the first time, feels colder than his absence. She turns the mirror around, and it's still empty.